Today we have our very esteemed speaker and distinguished speaker, none other than Dr. Tricia. But before I call her on stage, just to give you a bit of background about Dr. Tricia. Now, Dr. Tricia is the CEO of IDEAS, and it basically stands for Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs. It is an independent public think tank for public policy in Malaysia, and IDEAS have really shaped the public policies in Malaysia. Now, not only has Dr. Tricia attained PhD in School of Politics, History and Interrelations in Nottingham University, in her inaugural career, she has actually served as a research officer to the Selangor Menteri Besar of the Selangor State Government. And she has also served as a director for ASLI Center for Public Policy Studies. So amazing, isn't it? And one of her accolades is that she had attained the Meritorious Service Medal conferred by Selangor Sultan and the Monash University Malaysia Distinguished Alumni Award 2017. It's so amazing, right? So let's put our hands together and give a warm water welcome to Dr. Tricia. Over to you, Dr. Tricia.
Thank you so much, Christina, and I'd like to thank SIB for inviting me here today at this Biztalk, and a place at the river, which I think is what you call these talks. Before I came here, I thought it was just a center, like a small little unit, but I didn't realize that it's actually a full church plant. So it's great to know about the existence of this place, really near to my office. My office is just down, my sense of direction is really bad, so I don't know where Central Market is, but Central Market is there, so my office is basically in that direction. Maybe before I start, I'll tell you a bit more about myself on a personal level. So I am pretty much, truly a Malaysian. I grew up entirely in PJ, in Petaling Jaya. I went to school there all the way. I studied at Monash University in Sunway, did my master's in Warwick University in the UK, came back, and since then I've been working in the public policy space or think tank space, basically since 2006. I had a little bit of a brief period in the government, in the state government of Selangor. I worked with someone called Tan Sri Khalid Ibrahim. Some of you remember, he's the late Tan Sri. He's since passed away. He had kidney failure and so on. And then after that, I worked in doing different things. I have done a documentary on the late Teo Beng Hock, if you remember that name as well. He passed away. Well, yeah, he fell to his death while being interrogated by the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission. So I did a documentary about that because, obviously the government said it was suicide, but we didn't really believe it was. So that documentary has been screened in other international film festivals. And then anyway, long story short, I joined IDEAS in 2013. And I've been there ever since. So it's actually 11 years there. I took time out to do my PhD, but the last 4 years I've been back as the CEO. In my personal life, I have 2 small children. One is 6, one is 1, so they're both waiting for me at home. 2 girls. And some of you also asked me which church I go to. It's been a while actually since I went to a church, but the last time I went, I was registered at the Bangsa Lutheran Center, BLC.
Oh.
So I think my membership is still there. Maybe they haven't let me lapse yet. Thank you so much for inviting me to be back in this environment, in this space, and hopefully in the next half an hour I can use this time to tell you a bit about my work, about what's happening outside in the world. The title of today's talk is Thriving in Global Turbulence. And I was just talking to your pastor over here, who was saying that this place was set up, 2 weeks before the great turbulence of 2020. So I think all of us are very familiar with what it means to live in a time of great global turbulence, the pandemic and otherwise. So friends, so we're talking about global turbulence, right? What does this mean? I think, this is really a time when there are so many changes challenges, crises actually happening around the world, and it's very easy to feel overwhelmed. I just came back from Barcelona in Spain, where I attended and I spoke at this big international think tank conference. If you want to know what we do at think tanks, we basically do like policy research on different issues tackling society today. And in Malaysia specifically, we do policy research on economics and trade, institutional reform, public finance, democracy and governance, big issues of the day. But what I spoke at in Barcelona and the things that we talked about in this international conference on think tanks is pretty much what you and I are facing here today in Malaysia. What we are facing in Malaysia is not unlike what others are facing in other parts of the world, in Europe, across Africa, India, Latin America. They're all facing similar things. They term these things as the poly crisis. So we're not just facing one crisis, but it's multiple crises simultaneously taking place. So climate change, right? If we consider, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, global temperatures have risen by 1.1 degrees Celsius since the pre-industrial era. This small increase has had devastating consequences: extreme weather events, sea level rise, loss of biodiversity. Just last year, we witnessed catastrophic wildfires in Australia, in the US, which destroyed millions of acres of land, displaced thousands of people, and killed countless wildlife. So these events are no longer anomalies, right, like one-off, but they're actually very alarming signs of a climate that's changing rapidly. The term that's now used is not just climate change, but climate crisis. Energy transition is required to meet that. I think it's not just around the world. How many of us have been caught in very freak storms just here in the Klang Valley alone? The night that I was flying back to PJ from Barcelona, there was this freak storm that affected my neighborhood in section 16 PJ. And the trees fell all over the place. I couldn't get home. So we had to, the taxi had to go around in different ways to get back home. So, this is actually very real. It's affecting and impacting us in our personal lives already. The World Bank also estimates that over 100 million people could be pushed into extreme poverty by 2030 due to climate change alone. So if you think about that, 100 million lives disrupted, families torn apart, communities destabilized. So climate change is not just an environmental issue. The little girl is now not so little, like Greta Thunberg. You remember her? She was, on the Time magazine and so on. It's a humanitarian crisis. So what had happened the last few years, say 5 years ago, when she was talking about it as a young girl, I think we're now experiencing the effects of it today. So add this to the potential ramifications also of Donald Trump's possible return to the political stage. Sure, there are divided opinions about his leadership, but Trump will be contesting in the election in the US this year. And his policies, so from a policy perspective, right, his policies have been often characterized by unpredictability, volatility, stirred global uncertainty. So the international community is also left to wonder, like, what direction will the US take next? And the US, for many decades had provided global leadership. And in the absence of that kind of global leadership, who comes in to fill in the gap? How will it affect global alliances and conflicts? I think the other thing is also the US-China trade war. It started years ago, people have been talking about that, but now you're also seeing the impact of that US-China trade war in the resulting, I would say like fracas over technology. The US and China have this ongoing tech tussle over microchips and what kind of chips and technological advancements can be sold or cannot be sold, imposing sanctions and so on. So this economic confrontation has strained relations between the two largest economies, and it causes ripple effects worldwide. Supply chain disruptions. All of us have smartphones in our pockets today, right? The smartphones that you have actually rely on these chips, and these chips, if you read the book Chip War, which I'm currently reading by Chris Miller, is actually one of the most important technologies of today. And if this kind of global trade war takes place, it actually affects how expensive your next smartphone is going to be. There's also tensions in regions, right? Like Ukraine and the Middle East. These are, constant reminders of how fragile our geopolitical stability actually is. I think most of us grew up in a time of peace, right? Like our parents, our grandparents maybe went through World War I, World War II, but we are relatively fortunate. I don't think any of us have grown up to hear any sounds of bombs flying through the air. Our grandparents did, right? My grandmother used to tell me, wherever you go in the world, I was going to the UK to study. She said, make sure your room has no window with glass near the bed. Okay. And make sure that your bed has a space under it to crawl under, right? Just in case there are bombs that come through and then the glass shatters and then you need somewhere to hide. So I think, we have been relatively lucky, right, this generation, to not have grown up through that era of war-torn instability and so on. And we should consider ourselves lucky. But we have to admit, existing wars that are taking place out there. What's happening in Ukraine is terrible. We didn't think the war is going to last for such a long time. And then now what's happening between Israel and Hamas in Palestine, the Gaza Strip and so on. I think it's very confusing times for many people. How do you make sense? Global changes and these changes that are happening rapidly. Not to mention other things like the fact that these wars and the ongoing tensions in Myanmar as well, all of these will mean that you have unprecedented number of refugees and displaced people around the world. It's a crisis that Malaysia is also going to face. We have refugees here in our country, in our midst. I'm sure some of you have met them because they work in certain places, they're in the service industry, or some of you maybe volunteer to teach at certain refugee centers. So the point is, right, all of this is happening here already in our midst today. We also have the advent of AI. Yeah, how many of you have used ChatGPT before? Anyone? Yeah, so it's there, right? People in the think tank world don't really know also how to deal with it. I'm not sure, in churches, for example, in religious communities, how do you make sense of AI? What is the intelligence that lies behind the AI? And also fake news, right? How do you know what to trust with the messages that are coming into your smartphones every day? If you remember during the COVID period, there were a lot of messages going back and forth with regards to the vaccinations. This information war, right? About Pfizer versus AstraZeneca versus Sinovac and the Chinese-made vaccines. And if you're not equipped to know how to trust which media, how do you know what to trust actually? And how do you know whether a news site is something that is delivering something you can believe in? Therefore, that forms our worldview, that forms how we think about the world, about the space. And not to mention, this is the world that our children, my children, are going to grow up in. In the face of all these challenges and other challenges, which I'm sure, maybe I didn't name, but you have in your mind as well. We have to ask ourselves, right, is the world truly prepared for what lies ahead? Are we equipped to navigate these stormy waters of the 21st century? The answer, unfortunately, at this moment is not a resounding yes. While advancements have been made in various fields, in the fields of medicine and science, engineering, there are still glaring gaps, right, in how prepared we are to face this very complex world and these very complex issues. COVID-19 exposed significant weaknesses in global healthcare systems and international cooperation. If you remember, during COVID, there were a lot of these photos and videos that were going around about the local hospitals, the capacity that they were unable to face. I was very frustrated, stuck at home, so I started a hospital fund. And the hospital fund did so well because we knew that the capacity of the hospitals was so low. We managed to raise, I think, 2 million ringgit in just a period of 1 month, which is amazing. I mean, it speaks to It's a testament of how powerful Malaysians actually are when we put our hands and hearts together. But it also shows the tremendous weaknesses in our public healthcare system. And these systems still haven't really resolved, right? What happens if there is like another, touch wood, if there is another pandemic or a healthcare crisis? Where does Malaysia sit in the context of all of this global turbulence? Malaysia is a very unique country. We are always in between. You know, we are famously known as the stuck in the middle income trap. We're that middle income nation. We are in between India and China. So we're always in between. We're like in the middle of everything. We're neither like fully high income, neither are we so poor. US development aid agencies want to come and help us and give us funds because we don't actually need it, right? We are also in between US and China. We find ourselves having to balance our economic growth with environmental conservation. We have to navigate geopolitical tensions while striving for regional stability. We've made great strides in economic development. I mean, the fact that all of us here are probably around like middle class, you know, we have a certain income level that allows us to travel here, to have the food that we eat. But significant environmental challenges, deforestation, pollution, climate change, and our resilience as a nation will be tested in the face of these global upheavals. The fact that we're in Southeast Asia, we also have like the South China Sea dispute. For those of you who don't realize what's happening in the South China Sea, our ships and our oil tanks like regularly get disrupted by like Chinese naval vessels. So all of that's happening as we speak. And if there was any big like violence and tension, it will actually happen in the South China Sea. We have our other own problems, right? We have our inter-ethnic and inter-religious challenges. We have society that's like actually split down the middle. One half of our society mostly works for government. The other half of society works in the private sector. We go to different schools. We speak different languages. We have people who go to Chinese-speaking schools, Malay-speaking schools, kebangsaan, and those who can afford it go to the private international schools. Politically, we have polarization. We have the rise of hardcore conservative parties. I just came back from Terengganu. 2 days ago, I was there. And Terengganu is a state that is entirely governed by PAS, right? This dialogue, I met with 21 members of parliament and aduns, the local legislative assembly persons, who are all from PAS. And Terengganu is interesting because it's the only state in the whole country that doesn't have a single opposition member. They don't have any opposition UMNO. It used to be an UMNO state, right? And then it switched over to PAS. But today it's entirely PAS. But it's run by a Menteri Besar, a chief minister, who's actually very technocratic. He's an engineer. His name is Dr. Sam, or they call him Ahmad Shamsuri Mokhtar, or they call him Dr. Sam. So I think that's also confusing, right? Because some people it's like, oh, okay, you know, it's an Islamic state, but at the same time, it's run by this aerospace engineer who's actually an academic from a university background. So I can understand how that's confusing and how Malaysia seems to be split down the middle in so many ways. A lot of incidents recently have also sparked anger, I would say, including the socks issue, the Allah socks issue. And then you have our new king, which I will try not to speak so much about. There are undercurrents in the country today, which if we are also not careful and we are not able to manage properly, will run the risk of not seeing the kind of Malaysia that we actually love, being able to face a resilient future, right, together. So what do we do? I mean, there's a lot of opportunities amidst all of these challenges. There's a lot that we can do as a nation and as individuals to fortify ourselves against this storm on the horizon. We need to be able to invest in things that we believe in, institutions that are strong, sustainable practices. We cannot just use all these things as buzzwords. Like you probably hear this a lot, like green technologies, renewable, sustainable, and so on. But what does that actually mean? It means that we need to foster innovation and adaptability. Our education system is so important in Malaysia to invest in the future of the country, your children and your grandchildren. to be able to prioritize critical thinking, creativity, adaptability. We need to strengthen our networks, like in Malaysia, but also in the region. We need to look at regional organizations like ASEAN, like United Nations, and so on. Malaysia is going to be the chair of ASEAN next year, so there's a lot of conversation about that. What are we going to do? What kind of regional leadership are we going to provide? And closer to home, I just want to share, like some of you or many of you are young professionals, which you can do to, seize the opportunity is the wrong spelling. It should be SEIZE, seize this opportunity to drive positive change for the community in your own unique ways, right? I just want to share about ideas and what we are and who we are. So, in Ideas as an independent public policy think tank. So we work on a whole range of different issues. What we do is that we do these kinds of research papers, we publish policy papers, we conduct advocacy on important issues like transparency, governance. We work with MPs, with political parties to try and drive certain reforms. One example is, you all remember 1MDB? I'm sure everybody does. If anybody doesn't know 1MDB, you shouldn't be here. Just kidding. 1MDB was like international news, right? Like it literally like broke the country. It was the biggest money laundering case that the Department of Justice in the US actually talked about. Like when the Department of Justice made that announcement, they said this is the biggest money laundering case of money repatriation that we have to deal with. We don't want that to happen again. So that's why we have to work on our institutions. One of the big things that we're trying to do is to get political financing laws into place. So that means that we want Malaysia to enact a law that will govern how funds are channeled into political parties. We want it to be transparent, we want it to be governed by an independent commission that will regulate the political party financing. In 1MDB's case, the monies were supposedly from the Middle East, right? They said, Najib said that.
Donation.
It was donations, right? Thank you. From where? Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Yeah, and eventually the money was traded, and I can say this publicly because it's out in the court already, that the money actually went into political party hands. It was transferred specifically for the election. It was for the election campaign. So if anybody actually voted for UMNO in the 2018 election, you would have voted for a party that received money from Saudi Arabia to support their campaign. And we don't want that to happen, right? We don't want like foreign influence over our political system, whether it's from Saudi Arabia or from China or elsewhere. So this is why the Political Financing Act is so important. To be honest, it's very difficult. No political party really wants it because who wants transparency, right? And they can continue to operate in the shadows. One example of the work that we do, we also look at monitoring our budget. So our budget is the single most important document that everybody in Malaysia needs to know because that's where your taxpayers' money goes and that's how they decide where the money is going to be spent. So we advocate for budget transparency. We want the government to be even more transparent with how the government spends our hard-earned tax money. Now, for example, they rolled back diesel subsidy, right? What rolling back subsidies means is that they will get more funds to supposedly fund development. So development means like education and healthcare. But of course, with greater transparency, only can we know that that really is going to be spent on the things that they say they're going to spend on. So that's why budget transparency is really important. Maybe another thing that I can share we're doing is we're looking at political appointments on the boards of GLCs. So GLCs are government-linked companies. Malaysia has a lot of different companies that are linked to the government. So we monitor how many people are actually appointed on the boards and who are linked to political parties. So apart from that, we also deal with issues on Orang Asli education. As we know, we have Orang Asli indigenous population in the country. So we're working on that, and we're also working in the area of sub-national level. So we work closely with activists and youth on the ground to train them, to give them the right tools to understand these kinds of issues, these big policy issues and these matters, because we don't want it to concentrate just in the Klang Valley. Just like how, this is a church plant, you don't just want your church to be in one part of the Klang Valley, you want to reach out to the other parts. So we have done a lot of workshops in Kelantan, Sabah, Johor, Malacca, and so on. I will just try to end. Basically what I want to say is that all of us, in our small ways, can take actionable steps. We can advocate for policies that promote good governance and sustainability. We can support local businesses that subscribe to the same values that you have. And we can all educate ourselves about these issues. We have the power of community. You have the power of community because you are already in this community, in the church environment. What kind of issues do you care about? And it is true that we are grappling with all these huge global issues out there, but everything really starts locally, and what we can do in the time here and now, in the space here, is always, always, always about the times that they lived in. Every generation has gone through a time where they feel that they're under pressure, that times are changing too rapidly, that they don't know what to do to deal with the advance of new technology. When horses changed to cars, people rejected cars because cars cause accidents. If we would reject cars today, we would never be where we are today, right? As advanced as we are. So my point is that every generation has felt this way, that they've been under pressure from global turbulence, but every generation has been able to deal with those pressures because ultimately of the communities that they surrounded themselves with, the individual, the family, and in the community. I think all of you are well placed to drive the change that's needed to build a resilient and thriving future. So I hope that you embrace your own responsibility with courage and commitment. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that we can navigate these turbulent waters together and emerge stronger and more resilient. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tricia. We gained valuable insights on your sharing, how what is happening globally, and it also impact Malaysia for the matter of fact. I'm very impressed, Dr. Tricia, with your mission of ideas, where you actually want to promote an inclusive Malaysia, and you want to, to enhance trust in the institution, and also enhance the economic, activity. Now, would you be able to share one of the impactful projects that IDEAS have undertaken recently?
Sure. So we have had so many different projects over the years, but I will actually share about the political financing work. So as you know, it's a very sensitive topic, right? Nobody wants transparency over politics, to be honest. What we did is we gathered MPs from different parties, even if their parties didn't believe in it. And as individuals, they subscribe to it. So we said, okay, never mind, it doesn't matter your party doesn't support it, you just come, you believe in it, right? So you come. So they came, and as individuals, we built up this momentum to the point that it actually has become commonplace for people to say that it's needed as part of reforms, institutional reforms. And today the government actually has committed. Whether or not they do it is beyond my control, but at least they have put a public commitment into a document to say that yes, we will have this act. When, we don't know again, but it is there in the document. Managed to also get it up to the Parliamentary Select Committee to agree that something will happen. Yeah, so not there yet, but it's very, very close to it.
Thank you. It's in the pipeline.
It's in the pipeline.
Yeah, it's in the pipeline. That's awesome. I think you emphasize that we should have good governance, right? Especially in Malaysia, and also sustainability, which is these two topics is actually also very close to my heart. But with the key challenges that you spoke of just now, polarization and so forth, how do we move forward? No doubt, we place public policy on the table of the government, but how do we move forward from here? What are the practical things that we can do? Individually, corporately, just to move it forward.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many issues. Like, honestly, there are multiple things that Malaysia needs at the moment. As an individual, I would say that people can do is to make sure that your MP or your ADUN knows that you support a certain issue, because you don't make noise and pressure your MP and Abdul, they won't know that you think it's important. The chicken and egg, right? And they will only move to change things if they think that you care. That's how politicians work, because ultimately all they care about is the vote, right? And if they don't think that you care about the issue, they're not going to champion it. So that's what individuals can do to actually move the needle forward. Yeah, in fact, the corporate sector is really important. If you're in the corporate or private sector, that's what government listens to very, very much. The private sector, the corporate sector can place tremendous pressure points. Yeah, thank you
for sharing. I'm going to stand in front of the Adun office tomorrow. Present all our issues, right? Anyway, I just want to open to the floor. Any questions from the floor?
At the rakyat level, because of the political reality in Malaysia, there's a major trust deficit upwards to the politician. And at the politician level, flowing down, there's a lack of political will, right? I mean, all this idea about World Conference, idea, AI, I think this is coming of very general knowledge. So what drives it is actually political will, or the people revoke. Just like in Philippines what happened, just like Glasnost, just like Perestroika, just like French Revolution, or the attempt in Hong Kong 5 years ago, you know, to reform. I think that's the only way that we can impress politician change. Just like Tiananmen Square. So I think it's a very hard game. It's not an education game. What is right, what is wrong. We all know what's right, what's wrong. I think each of us is like, how we know. We know and know and know. But what is not moving the needle is, as I say, is the people trust deficit upwards to the politician, and the politician lack of political will to fix the issue. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right? I think over the last 4 years, there's been a tremendous trust deficit because of the political fragmentation, the political turbulence that Malaysians faced with the multiple changes of government, with the fact that the vote that we gave in 2018 was not what's the word? It was not fulfilled, right? Because the government changed at the result of just some parties deciding to switch coalitions. And that was actually very, very detrimental to public trust in the system. You're right that political will won't move unless there's a groundswell of anger. And that's what you saw happening with Bersih. I think Bersih did a great job in changing the way civil society and politics operated in the country. But today it's a very different Malaysia as well. In the past, it was quite easy to pit one side against the other, where you had a Barisan Nasional that was just so strong for over 50 years, and everyone wanted there to be changed. Everyone wanted to see electoral reform, and Barisan Nasional was, so to speak, a common enemy. But today it's so different, right? So the parties are all fragmented, civil society is fragmented as well. To be able to create that similar kind of groundswell of support and anger will not be possible. So I think that is the challenge. I mean, to be honest, that's a challenge for us as well, think tanks and civil society. How do we galvanize voices the way that Bersih managed to do before? We will never be able to. So we are in a little bit of a quagmire, because if we can't show that there's a groundswell of support, then the needle won't move. So everyone's kind of stuck at the moment. So this is where we're at. I mean, I will be honest that it is a little bit of a stuck situation. And yeah, you can only do pockets of reform, and you need to be able to appeal to the government based on their rational-mindedness, which unfortunately is not always rational. Even for the little reforms that we do have, right? So the government passed something called the Public Finance and Fiscal Responsibility Act last year. And even that was passed not because of Malaysians' support. It was passed because of international pressure from the banks and the fiscal ratings agencies. So, I mean, I admit it is a difficult situation today. The priorities have changed. The government feels like they need to say things and do things that are appeasing to the conservative right. That's true. And unfortunately, that's the case. Any party that comes into power today, that's the reality. They will have to say those things to placate the movements that they think are making the most noise.
Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Tricia, you mentioned that youth play a very important role in advocating public policies in the future. So yeah, just what is your word, for the next generation, in just, looking at public policy, educating themselves, how do we move, how do you encourage the youth in this aspect?
I mean, only 18 happened and everyone celebrated that, right? We lowered the voting age to 18. But we never accompanied that with any form of public education about politics. Like, our students don't learn about politics or the constitution, in fact, in schools. The schooling system is archaic. It requires constant update, and there's tremendous opportunity for people who are educated to provide this learning opportunity. So there's a great demand right now across university campuses. When we go down to do workshops for the students, especially in Bahasa, they keep asking us, can you come back? Then they spread word of mouth to another university campus. Oh, we heard that you conducted a workshop for this university in Kuantan. We are from Terengganu, we want that as well. So there is a great hunger for knowledge, for political knowledge, for knowledge about public policy, and we need to play that role. I think as educated people ourselves, we need to educate the youth, or the youth who are educated, go out and bring that message out to the rural areas. I mean, I'm not talking about propaganda or ideology or anything, I'm talking about basic, Malaysian politics 101. Talk about 1998. Talk about Anwar Ibrahim getting a black eye. Talk about Bersih. I don't know whether Bersih is in the history books actually. Does anyone know? Yeah, I mean, Bersih, all these fundamental events that have changed politics and history in Malaysia. Like, do our young people actually know about that? So I think, we have a really important role to play. And I just want to, what I said earlier, there is a hunger, there's a thirst out there, because nobody ever taught them. Like, you're telling them, I give you the right to vote, but I'm not giving you the knowledge about how to vote. And then a lot of them don't know, and then they will ask their parents. Their parents will vote a certain way because of history or culture or a certain affiliation. But to teach them actually, okay, this is how the institutions work. There's separation of powers, between the three pillars in a democracy. What is a democracy? How is it different from a flawed democracy? I mean, all these things, we need to pass it down to the next generation. Because if not, you're wasting an entire generation, and they don't know, they're not equipped with the right skill sets and the knowledge as well.
Thank you. I thank you so much for your passion. I think IDIS is doing an amazing job in pushing across public policies, and I think the younger generation needs to be educated and needs to really go into it and find out more, right? We just want to thank Dr. Tricia for coming. Don't you think that she did amazing? Let's give our hands and give her a big clap. Thank you, Dr. Tricia, for we're so honored to have you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.